So again, to go back in time, I think I went to the second um, wildflower pilgrimage, as it was then called, in 1979. And I saw Paul Summers give a presentation on the plants of the limestone cedar glades. And that's when I completely fell in love with that ecosystem. And then had the good fortune quite a few years later, 15 years later or so, to become the Tennessee Heritage Botanist and got to help conserve populations of, in particular, Dahlia foliosa, um, and did a lot of other survey work, both in the middle Tennessee limestone glades, as well as what I call the limestone or cedar barrens of the western valley of the Tennessee River. So I had a lot of chances to look at these systems. And then I come back to Middle Tennessee, hopefully every year, and do what is now called the Elsie Quarterman Wildflower Festival. And I solicit your attendance at those festivals. It's I think for the merit of it and the interest that it should generate, it's not as well attended as it might be. So if you're in anywhere within driving range of Lebanon and the Cedars of Lebanon State Park, I would encourage you to attend or to go there on your own and look around. The rangers can help you find the good places to see the glades. The other good news is that a large portion of the state forest that was designated as a natural area has come under the ownership and management of Tennessee State Parks. And Buddy Ingram, the former superintendent of Cedars of Lebanon, worked long and hard to make that happen. And now the Natural Areas Program and state parks, hopefully with the assistance of the Division of Forestry, who are still out there, they'll be conducting a lot more managing and burning to keep these areas open and maintain the habitat that these sun-loving plants need to survive. So I can't see all your faces, but I hope that a lot of you have been to these systems and have seen some of these plants, although really to get the full panoply of these plants really requires that you go there every month from February to November practically to see everything that's going to bloom. I rapidly scanned there's Kim. I rapidly scanned the people who were in attendance. I saw Todd, Cynthia. Thank you for being here, Cynthia. David Dool. I'm sorry we didn't get more of a chance to talk back earlier in the month. And Yolande from Swanee. So it's good to see you all here, plus several of you who I don't think I've met in person. So that's cool. Well, let me see if I can manage this thing. Let me try to share my screen. Let's see how that's going to work. And there we are. And there's the thing. And there's do you see this now?
Yes.
Try to go slideshow. There we are. So I'll confess, I'm pirating and repirating. I still says I'm NatureServe. I should have deleted that. But anyway, I pulled this out of the hat here kind of at the last minute. I've been traveling a lot, and I'll confess I waited too long to try to put this together, but it's going to work. I gave a version of this to the Tennessee Naturalist Program, and it wasn't exactly what they wanted. So I changed it around a lot, but I captured some of this material from a program Dwayne Estes gave to the Austin Peay. I guess he's affiliated with Austin Peay from the Department of Biology and the Center of Excellence. So I should acknowledge him right at the beginning. Let's see if we can advance. There we are. So I've thrown in a little basic botany that will probably be not necessary for you. I've thrown in a little bit about different types of glade habitats. I've thrown in a little bit about some of the hypotheses of how the different plant populations got to different parts of the country over time. So we'll ramble through this thing here. Obviously, floral morphology is critical. I'm going to have a slide of a radially symmetrical and bilaterally symmetrical flower. That's something I learned at the glades. And again, you can't do every plant in here. It would be a very long slideshow. So forgive me if I've left out your favorite glade plant. I'm afraid, except by extension, I left out glandularia, but we'll cover a few of these. And again, I'm rocketing back and forth from the old names, what Dennis would know, what we can call the old names that we learned in the 1970s and 1980s, and the old families that we learned then. And it's a brave new world of new families, new genera, new species. Everything is very different from what you and I learned in the 1980s, Dennis. So we're going to try to ride both horses here. So what I'm learning more and more, and everybody struggles with this, the trick is trying to tell the difference between the variability within a species and the variability between species. And this is how botanists get new species published. They look around and realize, well, here's this population that's really different from the normal plants of this particular species. You know, people know the Small's ragwort, what's now Pachyra, or used to be Senecio anonymous, or Smallii. We saw some plants on a weird rock up just north of where I live that have enormous ray flowers and very pinnatifid leaves and don't key to anything. And one population of them so far, but I guarantee in the next few months, somebody is going to be describing that as a new species. And there's more new species popping up than people can keep up with. Everybody has their long list of new things that need to be described. But you got to watch out for this genetic versus environmental variation, in particular with the we'll see the Hypericum spherocarpum, and you look at that in a hot, dry limestone glade in the middle of July, and the leaves are all rolled up and curled up and just look like a little hat pin in their shape. And of course, I've got growing in my moist yard in Durham, and the leaves are wide and luxuriant and very different looking. But that's just environmental variation. But people did name different varieties based on that environmental variation. The floral parts and all this, everybody knows that stuff. Obvious thing. So we got to know what the floral parts are to help us identify these flowers. Here's the radial versus bilateral symmetry. This is what Tom Patrick from Georgia showed me, how to tell the difference between phlox and verbena, or in this case, glandularia, with the bilateral or zygomorphic flower, and then radially symmetrical or actinomorphic is phlox. And Dennis, I've been struggling with penstemon here lately. I hope I've got to go back. I said, well, I ought to go back and try to use my own treatment in the flowers of Tennessee and the Cumberland River Valley and see if it was any good. I'm really not sure now. But I finally figured out the local penstemons after many years. There's glandularia. You can see in particular this one in the lower right that it's definitely bilateral and not radially symmetrical. So what are limestone cedar glades? And we could call them limestone glades, we could call them cedar glades. I have chosen to call them limestone cedar glades because the problem with just calling them cedar glades is the cedar is really what clogs them up. The cedar is like if you will, the sort of constipation factor in limestone glades. If you get too much cedar, then you don't have any wildflower action because there's too much shade. So this is a habitat type unique to limited parts of the eastern U.S. Limestone bedrock obviously is near the surface. In the case of the Central Basin glades, it's Silurian limestone. The Western Valley is, I'm sorry, it is Ordovician. The Western Valley is Silurian, but it's the habitat conditions that the shallow soil creates and makes tree growth difficult. So then you wind up with plants that are related to or are disjunct populations of the plants of the prairies and plains. So either a different member of the same genus or actually a disjunct population. So we'll discuss some of that, endemism and disjunction. And the cedar comes from the abundance of eastern red cedar that occurs on the margins of the glades or cracks in the bedrock. So if you go out there, you should observe where you see the cedar growing. If it's a site that's not been managed, it may be a limestone rock with a wall of eastern red cedar that's virtually impenetrable around the margin. That's not good because it means you've lost the ecotonal habitat that might have perennial grasses. So the management now is to aggressively push back this cedar and create more open habitat that's deeper soil, but also open where you get your perennial grasses. And plants have special features. We're going to touch on some of those. And again, surrounded by a prairie-like border. And we think that would have been more extensive before fire suppression, the extinction of megafauna, and also the exclusion of free-range grazing. And all that, a lot of that happened only, not the megafauna, but a lot of the fire suppression or lack of fire rather, and the free-ranging livestock, that occurred fairly recently in say 70 to 80 years ago. So we've had 80 to 100 years of conditions that were not favorable to this open habitat environment. The prominent families that we're going to touch on, I really don't have any grasses to talk about, and I've kind of forgot the Crassulaceae, but a lot of mustards, several prominent mints. Beans, of course, are a big deal. We've got several beans to show you, and then I think the Asteraceae, with probably the most famous plant of this ecosystem, the Tennessee coneflower, of course. Survival strategies of glade plants, underground storage organs. This is called a geophyte. The Pediomelum subacali, the Nashville breadroot, has an enormous starchy food storage organ that it could survive periods of extreme desiccation. Winter annuals, including Leavenworthia, probably the best known. Succulents, and again, I didn't include these in the slideshow, but things that, again, are desert-like adaptations. Crassulacean acid metabolism. Don't ask me to explain this, but it's a variant of photosynthesis that's more water efficient. And then things like Grindelia that have a waxy or sticky resinous coating, and that retards water loss. So these are all adaptive strategies for living in a xeric environment. So many plants are endemics. Some of the rarities, like the Tennessee coneflower, are true endemics, limited to the 3 counties, a 14-mile radius in the Central Basin. Some plants that are state listed are disjunct. It means they're not globally rare, but they're noteworthy in Tennessee because of their limited distribution. The endemic ones, of course, include Echinacea tennesseeensis, my ground plum in only 1 county. Leafy prairie clover is not truly endemic. It's also in Illinois and I think in Alabama, but it's very limited in range. The Nashville breadroot, and then the glade violet, which is quite common and not rare, but it's very restricted in distribution. Here's a general, this is an old map. Probably the Baskins did this, but it's a very generalized map showing limestone glade distributions in the southeast. There's this unusual system in Lee County, Virginia. There's scattered sites in the Ridge and Valley of Tennessee that I think that are very poorly known still to this day. There's these glades in northern Alabama, in what's called the Molten Valley. Those are very interesting if you ever get down there. They're on kind of a weird limestone, clay, wet kind of soil. And then there's one little dot there for the Decatur County Western Valley of the Tennessee River. Fabulous area. I know the TNPS has done trips out there before, and several different kinds of glades in Kentucky. That's a general aspect of what these systems look like in the photograph. Landscape view. These are big kind of stripes of limestone across the landscape. It's interesting to see these, of course, in Google Earth or in aerial photographs. Different variations on the theme. I believe this is on Factory Road or one of those roads out there. This is a slope. It's really what the Baskins called the xeric limestone prairie. And that's where we go to perennial grasses instead of annual grasses, as you would have in a true glade. And there are bare rock glades, there are gravel glades, there are these prairie zones, and that's part of what Elsie Quarterman did, was to delineate and describe these zones, which sort of represent a static zonation, but also represent a theoretical succession pathway given enough time and a lack of disturbance. Of course, on the solid limestone rock, you're never going to get a tree to grow unless there's a crack. So basically, plant succession is not happening on the absolutely bare limestone. The Western Valley of the Tennessee River, these are on slopes more resembling maybe what you'd have in the Ridge and Valley and the Ozarks and the Molten Valley. Those occur more on slopes. In my view, the Middle Tennessee glade, the Central Basin glades, are just about unique for being so flat because of the flatness of the Ordovician Central Basin surface. Makes them certainly very distinctive. There are wet areas. You think, well, it's all dry, it's all hot and dry. How are there wet areas? There are little groundwater seepages that come out that have seasonal flow, and this provides kind of a inclusion of a wet, seasonally wet area within
It's already
the limestone.
started.
Pardon?
Someone did unmuted themselves.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, but see, this person's probably wearing rubber boots standing in the wet mud of the seep. So you get some of your very distinctive rare plants in this habitat. And then prairies and woodlands is kind of a whole nother topic. This is the black belt. Again, deeper soil, but with some soil characteristics that make it difficult for trees to grow. So you get a more prairie environment. And again, you have grazers, you have lightning fire, you have First Peoples fire, enhancing that as a factor in the development of these systems over time. And of course, in Tennessee, you remember, Dennis, they always talked about the hypsothermal. That was a dry period 3,000 to 6,000 years ago when the habitat would have been more favorable across the region for these xeric adapted plants. And once that dry weather, once the climate shifted back to a more overall mesic and wet and cooler climate, some of that marginal habitat became lost and the plants were restricted to only the most extreme habitats. But that's the black belt of Alabama.
Oh, how did it already start? I thought it started.
The black belt, prairie type environment. And of course, a lot of this is converted. There's been an enormous effort to save what remains of this system over the last 30 years or so. And in the Great Lakes, even up north, there are glade-like things that they call alvars. These go into Ontario, Canada. And with an annual sporobolus that's either the same as or a relative of our little annual sporobolus. So there are some similarities between this alvar system and our own. I say ours. I still feel connected to it. I'm just going to let this go. I'm actually not sure what it represents. Distribution of these endemics of the interior low plateau. So see, some of them have broader ranges and some have very tight ranges. So in that little maroon zone in the middle, that's where 21 of the endemics are found. The endemics of the interior low plateau, which is a region that encompasses central Tennessee, central Kentucky, northern Alabama, and depending on how you define it, portions of southern Alabama, southern Indiana and Illinois. The ILP, or interior low plateau. All right, now here's our plants. Here's what we're waiting for. So and I apologize, the families aren't random, but they're not necessarily in anybody's accepted order of the presentation of the families. But we're starting with the lily family, and I threw in some traits of the families. This was part of the content for the show that I gave to the Tennessee Naturalist Program. This is Chenolerium crocium, or crocium sunnybells. And this is one of those ones that grows in the wet areas or seeps of the limestone glades. Beautiful plant, good populations that Tennessee Heritage has just discovered a new population in Rutherford County that they're working on the conservation of. There's some enormous populations. It has a range that goes to East Texas. Again, limestone, wet areas. The sepals and petals are very much alike. And this is a good example of that, where really here it's very hard to tell which is the inner whorl and which is the outer whorl. So we call them tepals or tepals. It arises from a little bulb, and the leaves have parallel veins. That's true of all of the monocots. In the lily family, I said in the broad sense, in some treatments, this is now in the agave family. And in some treatments, it's even in a different oddball family that I couldn't even figure out what that other family was. But there's been a lot of churning in the placement of the things in the old lily family and mixing them up with onions and agaves and all kinds of other stuff. So there's no telling where your favorite plant wound up if it used to be in the lily family. Gorgeous plant. Again, you got to see this. We usually see this on the Wildflower Festival in late April, early May. Onion, nodding onion. There may be some other taxonomic churning in this group. There may be different entities within our concept of Allium sternum that deserve to be recognized. And I don't know where the type collection was from, but there's northern elements, there's southern elements, there's Ozarkian elements, maybe mixed up in one species complex. It does smell like an onion. And now this is in the onion family. That's pretty well settled. This is not technically not a glade plant, but I threw it in here anyway. You see it a lot in the limestone forests around the glades. Rue anemone, the common Thalictrum thalictroides. And of course you go, well, this doesn't fit my concept. I thought monodicots had 5 petals. This has 7. These are not petals, they're sepals. So I think it's the number of them, the morosity. There's a term called morosity for how many you've got of something. These are sepals, and they're just not under as good of a control, that they're not always 5. Sometimes they can be green, they revert to a more sepal-like condition. Sometimes they can be pinkish in color, but this is kind of your average presentation of this flower. The very unusual flower of the wild columbine. This is, again, not a glade plant. Technically, it's scattered around. It certainly likes limestone. It's scattered around in limestone areas. It's very common over here where most of the soils are acidic. And it looks so unusual. Of course, if you look at it from the end, the top of the quote top or bottom, you'll see that it is radially symmetrical with these 5 horns sticking up. It's a very unusual floral morphology. And we got to mention the oaks. These are components of what would be probably oak woodlands under conditions of fire and grazing, and old growth trees. You'd have, and post oak is another one we could include here. Post oak, chinkapin oak, shingle oak is almost like a little understory tree, but very characteristic of the limestone central basin. And then bur oak, which I used to see as a Nashville street tree at times, but we found a population of these in Cedars of Lebanon State Park, kind of in what you might call a flatwoods forest. And we're way down at the southeastern end of the range, of the continuous range. There's some scattered ones in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, but we're there on the southeastern range of bur oak. So pay attention. If you see these around, they're very noteworthy. Just to represent the rose family here, we got Carolina rose, common around the common around the shrub borders of limestone glades. And everybody loves these glade cresses. This is Leavenworthia stylosa. There's 3 or 4 or 5 species scattered around central Tennessee and Alabama. These are annuals, winter annuals. So again, it's that strategy where they germinate in the winter when there's a rainfall and the glades can be quite moist. So they'll germinate and then flower very early, starting in February. And you can almost smell these before you see them. If you're downwind of a big patch of these, it's a very fragrant, extremely sweet, fragrant odor. If you've never experienced that, it's worth getting out there to check that out. And some are white with the yellow center. In general, we used to, I don't know how true this is now, Dennis, but we thought of the southern populations as being more yellow. So here's a yellow one. Sometimes they have a little bit of pinkiness, pink coloration in the petals as well. Again, 4 petals, shaped like a cross. This family, the Brassicaceae, I didn't stick the family name in here, but the Brassicaceae used to be called the cruciferae. So here's the yellow form of that. The little bump on the end of the fruit This is the style. So that's where the name stylosa comes from. Several things in the borage family. These have 5 lobes. As you can see, the flower has a prominent tube usually. This one has the most prominent corolla lobes, Lithospermum canescens, called the hoary puccoon. Hoary just means it's kind of hairy, rough, hairy. And puccoon, I'm told, was a Native American First Peoples name for a dye plant. So perhaps the root or flowers were used as a dye stuff, the borage family, hoary puccoon. Again, an early bloomer. We still saw it in, I saw some the other day here, which seems kind of late for it, but we certainly saw it late April, early May. It's a very short plant. So once all the grasses grow up and the taller plants attain their full height, it's much harder to find. And its close relative, the little Lithospermum tuberosum. Notice the hair on it. It's got longer lobes, I guess, or the flowers are smaller, but the lobes are longer relative to the tube. Lithospermum, of course, sounds like is like stone seed. So this is called stone root, but they do make a little hard, pale nutlet. And then this thing, which Dennis, we used to know as Anosmodium molly, that's now been thrown into Lithospermum. Those are the beautiful flowers. They're just a green color with tiny little lobes, a long tube and very tiny little lobes. But this is a remarkable plant. And again, it has fairly large, relatively evident, seeds when they ripen, and they're very hard and very white, bone-like or rock-like. So that's where this gets the name marble seed. This would be a good time to see that right now, probably. It was just starting into flower, 2 weeks ago. The bean family, of course, there's red buds all around in the limestone country. They're very prominent when they bloom, and they make an interesting contrast with the dark green of the cedar trees. In my view, a beautiful flower. This is sort of in a unusual group of beans. It's not in the typical, it's not like a mimosa type bean, and it's not a pea type of bean. It's sort of in this intermediate group that is thought of as a subfamily, but it may not be really unified. All these have legumes, and all your beans have some kind of legume, even if it's a little one-seeded legume that doesn't look like a bean, but it's technically a legume. We call the ones that the desmodiums have, we call them, those little segments, we call them loments. Loment segments. There's the fruit in the lower right corner. Flowers and young fruit are edible. This is one of our more famous rare plants, the leafy prairie clover. And I neglected, I ran out of time. I didn't get Gattinger's prairie clover in there. Gattinger's prairie clover should be starting blooming now, I would think, and going on for a few weeks. Beautiful magenta flowers that lay like in a head like this, that kind of lay on the ground. The plant's very recumbent. This is an upright plant, and again, it grows in these wet areas of limestone glades. There's a few spots for it at Cedars, also on what we used to call the Hall Farm, which is part of Flat Rock Natural Area. So if you get a chance to go on any limestone glade tour, with natural areas, or certainly with the Native Plant Society, get out there and check these things out. And again, the legume is not evident. I think it's a one-seeded legume that's tucked in here under these bracts. So this flowers, see the bottom has flowered first, and it'll continue flowering up the top of this inflorescence. Certainly one of my favorite limestone glade plants. And another famous bean, the Nashville breadroot. This will grow in just the driest, rockiest limestone glades. We saw it back a couple of weeks ago. I've seen, there was a friend of mine who actually dug one up. He was working in an area where there was a road cut or some massive soil disturbance, and you could find these tubers. And he had one that was the size of a softball, big spheroidal, starchy root. So undoubtedly the native people would have used these. You'd need a pretty good digging stick to get at them, though, but undoubtedly it was a source of food. It was certainly the related species, Pediomelum esculentum, which of course means edible. That was out in the prairies and plains of the western U.S., and the Lewis and Clark expedition subsisted on it. It was a food of the first peoples out there. And occasionally you see a white one, about 1 out of 1,000,000 is white. So that's noteworthy. Beautiful, beautiful flowers. Some of them, I don't know if it's the photo, the light quality or what, but some of them are even a richer purple than this in their appearance. And if you have, again, if you haven't seen this plant, it's a sort of that leaf reminds one of a oh gosh, another type of bean, like the Texas bluebonnet, blanking on that genus, but this is Pediomelum. Again, formerly we used to call this Soralia, Dennis, but now it got put into Pediomelum. Another gorgeous bean family plant, and these are in the regular bean subfamily. This is Trifolium calcaricum, and I did not get to know this plant when I was in Tennessee. It had just been described very recently, so it wasn't described until the late 80s or early 90s. I think Leo Collins, who worked for TVA, he helped get this published or discovered it or something. If you see the leaf, it does not have that white chevron like the common clover in your yard. If you go out and look at it, it's got a white V shape or chevron shape on the leaf. This lacks that, and it's running. I mean, it forms rhizomes. There's other running clovers, running buffalo clover up in Kentucky and maybe parts of Tennessee, but this one, I'm not sure of the total distribution, but people are working on reintroducing populations of it. I think it's more found in the deeper soil areas around and near limestone glades. At least the places that Margie Hunter has planted it are back in sort of wooded areas where it seems to be doing fine. So it doesn't have to be out in the hot, rocky, true glade areas. It likes a little deeper soil and I guess some degree of moisture. And I got to throw out the astragalus here. This is Pine's ground plum, and then the Tennessee milk vetch. And astragalus is such a big family. I mean, we only have, I believe, 3 species in Tennessee, these 2, and then Astragalus canadensis in the Western Valley and maybe some other areas. Yesterday, I saw in the sandhills of North Carolina, Astragalus michosii, which is a beautiful pink one with small flowers, upright inflorescences, gets up to about 3 feet tall. These are very modest plants. They're very low. They're low growing. As you see, the fruit are laying on the ground. Very different, though. They'd be in different sections of that very large genus at west. Some are called ground plums. Some are called loco weeds. Some are called milk vetches. Again, arguably hundreds of, I think it's fair to say, dozens, if not hundreds of species at west. The Tennessee milk vetch was well known. The ground plum, not so much. I discovered it. I just happened to see it one day in 1980 when I was riding around with my parents and saw these red fruit laying flat on a limestone rock and said, "Oh my God, that's got to be an astragalus." I had enough sense to know it was an astragalus, but it was not one that was in the books. And brought it to the attention of my colleagues, and there was quite a bit of debate about it. The initial hypothesis was this was a disjunct population of a plant from the prairies of Kansas, Astragalus crassicarpus. It's related to that, but it was different enough that the world astragalus expert Rupert Barnaby came down to Middle Tennessee and determined that certainly the fruit was sufficiently distinct that it deserved to be a new species, and it was described in about 1987, I think. Pink flowered, pink to purple flowered. Yeah.
Milo.
Yeah. Hello.
Are these named for you?
Well, the common name. Yeah, the common name.
Was it Pat? Was that because you discovered them?
Yes.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Turned out there were 2 early collections. There was actually a collection by Gattinger but it was sterile, or it was the flowers had dried up and you couldn't tell what color they were. There was also a collection by Alfred Klepsch, who was Ed Klepsch's father. But those were just put in the astragalus unidentified folder, and nobody knew what to do with them because nobody knew where to find the living plants. Gattinger's collection was from Laverne, so arguably it was more widespread than it is now. But they're smooth fruit, and then the smooth kind of ovoid fruit, and then the Tennessee milkvetch has these sort of horn-shaped hairy fruit, and the flower color is different, so it's cool. It's cool. Two different St. John's worts. This is the big shrubby one, glaucous shrubby one that's on the cover of the Tennessee Wildflower book, Middle Tennessee Wildflower book. Beautiful plant. The photographer captured a little sweat bee or something on it. And this forms a shrubby margin. So there's 3 shrubs, and I didn't put, I could have put Rhus aromatica in here. Maybe I'll probably add some stuff to this show. Now that I've got it put together, I can use it again sometime. But the Rhus aromatica and this St. John's wort and then the glade privet form really a community, a shrub border or patch community within the limestone glade matrix. Just a gorgeous plant. And then this little one, this is the round fruit St. John's wort, Hypericum spherocarpum. This is really prominent in the glades. It's very short, and again, has a lot of ecophenic variation depending on how moist an environment it's grown in, and the sort of conditions, how dry the weather has been. It will react by kind of rolling up its leaves to retard moisture loss. And this is now, Dennis, you'll love this. I think we had it in Portulacaceae back in the day. Now it's put in the Montiaceae, which I call the miner's lettuce family. The western plant called Montia is a miner's lettuce. That's the family that has Claytonia in it. I forget what was in Portulacaceae in the past, but now it's in the family Montiaceae with Claytonia. And this is almost, you could set your watch by this. It's part of what one might call a floral clock. I think it opens up around 4 o'clock when the glade is at its most brutal and hottest. These are probably coming into bloom now, but they'll continue on into the summer. And this is a very small plant. You don't have a scale in this, but those little leaves, which are very succulent, thick little leaves with a very waxy cuticle. Again, a life strategy to retard water loss and help your survival in a rocky desert-like environment. Those are only about 1.5 inches high, but it's a gorgeous plant. But you got to get out there, take your sunscreen and some extra water if you want to see this plant. Now Femoranthus. So we knew it as Tollinum, Dennis. Now it's Femoranthus. And again, one of those groups that new species are still being recognized. In the morning glory family, this little Evolvulus natalianus. This is a good example of a disjunct. I'll show you a range map here in a moment. It's a morning glory family, but it's not a vine. And I don't know, I feel like this is something, I don't recall it from Cedars of Lebanon. It was from other areas, maybe up in Davidson or different places. And at one point, this was state listed. I'm not sure if it still is. Here's that range map. So that's a true disjunction where it's Ozarkian and west. And even the Ozarkian part is kind of a tail of an even further western distribution into Kansas and Oklahoma. So that's arguably a plant of the Great Plains that jumps over to Middle Tennessee. So just our three counties, I think. The glade violet has a very cut leaf. I wish I had gotten the inset of the leaf. The leaf is extremely divided. That makes it distinctive. And again, I think this is a Central Tennessee endemic, again, unless there's a few in Kentucky or Alabama, but I think it's largely a Middle Tennessee endemic. Couple of things in the mint family. This is another one you'll smell it before you see it. If you're walking around in the right place, all of a sudden there's a big eruption of a minty odor in the air, and you have stepped on Glade calamint or Glade savory. We called it Satiriga. Now I think it's Calamintha. Who knows? It might be in yet another genus now, but Calamintha glabella. I'm sorry, it's not Glade skullcap. I forgot to delete that line. This is the Calamintha glabella. Here's the Glade skullcap, Scutularia australis. We saw this a couple of weeks ago. Very small flowers. Again, this picture kind of belies its diminutive size. This one is not aromatic, but it has the square stem and opposite leaves, characteristic of the mint family. There's several skullcaps in Tennessee, probably about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 species, certainly. Scutularia ovata. It likes limestone. That's sort of found more in the forest environment, though. Has big heart-shaped leaves. Beautiful plant. And then I think this is my last flower. I've got a few more slides after this, but this is Echinacea tensiensis. A lot of information about this online. It's very famous for having been, I think, the first plant. One of the first, or I think the first plant listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act back in the 1970s. Again, when I was just learning about plants, I mean, I saw a Smithsonian Institution magazine about the Endangered Species Act that had a picture of Echinacea tensiensis. And I went, wow, I need to see where that thing grows. So that, again, helped attract me to the information about cedars of Lebanon and the limestone glades, and then encouraged me to have my little career in botany and plant conservation. Successful recovery. So one of the first to be listed, and justifiably enough, one of the first to be delisted. It is no longer on the endangered species list because the recovery plan was successfully implemented. So that's quite a remarkable story and a good example of how this is really supposed to work. A lot of people worked on that. Paul Summers and the Nature Conservancy, and Elsie Quarterman, and Dr. Hemmerly, and just dozens and dozens of people I can't even begin to name that worked to implement that, to write and implement that recovery plan. It was a lost plant for a while. There were early collections. McGregor had described it, and there was a fear that it had been lost when Persepolis Lake was impounded and flooded. But then populations were found, more and more populations were found and conserved, and it went from really being, lost to being listed to being recovered. And we call it, there's different heads in the aster family. You can have heads like a dandelion that are all raised. There's another term for that. Ligulate, a ligulate head would be a dandelion, and they're heads that are purely discoid, that do not have rays. And this is the true typical Asteraceae radiate head with disc flowers and ray flowers. So every little green spot in the middle is a separate flower. So the whole thing is a composite head, which is how we get the name, the old name, composite family, Compositae for the aster family. Baskin and Baskin listed 29 endemics, and there was a big debate about, I'm not going to give you the whole story here on this, but there was a big debate about how the endemic taxa enter the Southeast from the Ozarks or Southwest. There's several distribution patterns. Here's this, the tightest little endemic pattern with Astragalus bibulatus, Echinacea tensiensis, Leavenworthia stylosa, and Phacelia dubia, which is kind of a weedy plant, but it's really quite a range restricted endemic. Well, dubia variety interior, I should say. That's the tightest endemic pattern. Then you get a northern Alabama pattern with these other Leavenworthias and Delphinium alabamicum. That may be in the Moulton Valley area. Then you get a Middle Tennessee and northern Alabama pattern with Lobelia gattingeri. That's again one I forgot to stick in the show. That's a slightly broader ranging endemic. The Eriogonum harperi, that's not really a glade plant. It's on limestone bluffs. If people know this site, there's an unusual limestone bluff along, I believe it's along the Caney Fork. It's on the westbound lane of I-40, just east of a rest area. That's where you can see this Eriogonum. If you slow down, you can probably see the Eriogonum from your car window as you drive by. There's several other rare plants there. Some of the plants from northern Kentucky, I guess that's Solidago shortii and another Leavenworthia up there. Slightly more widespread, there's that Onosmodium, Lithospermum molly, this beautiful Delphinium. I didn't include that in the slideshow. That's probably blooming now. That's absolutely a gorgeous plant. And then the Viola Eversonii with a little bit of Ozarkian occurrences creeping in there, but still a endemism nonetheless, but slightly a more relaxed endemism. That in the upper left, that's Gattinger's prairie clover. And then below that is the limestone glade clover. A very broken up pattern of distribution. And this creates some problems in terms of how did things wind up in these different places, but they're still so habitat restricted. So the Dahlia foliosa and Echinacea tensiensis, and this is Quarterman's Gradiola quartermanii that was fairly recently described, but they found populations of that in these far-flung places. So that's again, a more relaxed type of endemism, but that sort of creates some speculation about how you would wind up with this pattern. Again, I'm not going to give you the whole story here, but there's questions about what happened. How did this come about, given that those northern areas were glaciated? And there's big debates among the Delcourts and other people about how, where the plants went during there were repeated periods of glaciation and then these interglacial periods when the glaciers retreated. So how did all that work? And we don't really know. It's all in the realm of speculation, but some people thought that the colder climate and the high groundwater table would have eliminated the glade plants. It was in Tennessee, north of 34 degrees latitude, which is, well, I don't know where it exactly is, but it's south of Middle Tennessee. So one speculation was that northern Alabama was a refugium for these plants. That's the northern Alabama. There's 34 degrees north latitude. So that's a representation of the northern Alabama hypothesis, that those would have been eliminated. And then they recolonized. But that's not, I'll spoiler alert, that's not the hypothesis that the genetic data support. So the competing hypothesis was that the Middle Tennessee would have remained suitable habitat, and glade communities remain somewhat intact. And this is the hypothesis that they got to northern Illinois. See, it's not even southern Illinois, it's northern Illinois. They got to northern Illinois by migrating northward in post-Pleistocene time, so fairly recent. I mean, that's within, within native people's history here. So this requires a migration route. And there are these things, there are limestone ledges along rivers and Illinois hill prairies and different sort of patch habitats that could have provided a migration route. So this is the best hypothesis that the genetic data support. In other words, those northern populations are more genetically depauperate. So it implies that founder plants somehow got there, founder plants or founder seeds got there, and populations were created, developed that were less genetically diverse, that were genetically depauperate. And then the corridor areas, the species became extinct and then became restricted to Illinois, Tennessee, and Alabama. So this is the model of, see, the different colored circles in central Tennessee represent the greater genetic diversity. And then in Alabama, you have less diversity, and in Illinois, you have even less diversity. So this supports the this dispersal hypothesis from central Tennessee, what is now Central Tennessee. And I used a lot of Daryl's photos. These are people who contributed to certainly to Dwayne's work, which I presented in a truncated form. And then Dr. Hemmerly and of course Kim there. Thank you for all your work with the Center for Cedar-Related Studies. Dwayne is still working on all this. He has a group now called the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. If you haven't heard him talk, I'm sure he's all over YouTube. If you want to hear him talk, or either in the lecture hall or in the field, he's a great explainer of things in the field. So I encourage you to go to Southeastern Grasslands Initiative and look at their information. And I primarily encourage you to get out there, take your sunscreen, take your water bottle, and get out to the limestone glades and see these beautiful wildflowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Milo. Very nice. Well, look, if you have questions that Milo hasn't answered, please write them down in the chat and we'll feed them to him and see what we can come up with.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Someone says they were looking for Astragalus tennesseeensis in Indiana. Wow. Okay. Well, good luck. Hope it turns up. That'd be cool. That does happen. Things get rediscovered. Oh, evening primrose. I've got a good story about evening primrose. So the pink one, which I love, it's all over my neighborhood, growing in cracks in the sidewalk, basically. But that is native to further west. The pink one, the yellow one, the large fruited or Missouri evening primrose. We've called it Oenothera missouriensis. It's now known today as Oenothera macrocarpa. And the flower is just enormous. And I have a little story to tell. When I was up working for natural areas, what we then call natural heritage, they were working with the guy, Mr. Hall, who was still around. They were working with Mr. Hall to get the Hall farm. And I realized there was all these Missouri primrose out there. So I got Reggie Reeves and Alexa, who is now my wife, and some of her friends, and we didn't take a case of beer, but we took non-alcoholic beverages and things to munch on, and took our lawn chairs, and we went out to the Hall farm, big flat limestone expanse. It was a full moon, so we went out there with our lawn chairs. The full moon came up. The Chuck Wills widows began to cry and call, and then these buds, in other words, the buds are cigar shaped, the buds of the evening primrose, and they're probably certainly 2, if not 3 inches long, like a little cigar, or really like a joint. Let's be honest, they look like a little yellow joint. They began to rotate, and then you could almost see this happen in slow motion. They began to rotate, and then the moths came, the big kind of tobacco worm moths, sphinx moths, began to fly in and pollinate those while they were still unrolling. As they stick their long proboscis or whatever they've got into that tube, into that yellow joint, when the end opens up, and they do their pollination, and then these things unscrew themselves and open up, after dark. So that's a sight to behold. And if somebody wanted to raise some money, you could get your donors to pay $100 to come out there and drink a ginger ale and listen to the Chuck Wills widows and watch the primrose open.
Wow.
It was cool.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, that was an amazing night. And there are other evening primroses. There's Laciniata. That's a little more weedy, but I think there's other, and then of course just the common evening primrose. But there may be 2 or 3 other yellow evening primroses. But the Missouriensis, the macrocarpa, is the one to see. And then when you go around and see these huge papery fruits on the ground, that's what's the other thing that's weird about those. The fruits persist for quite a long time. They're big papery triangles.
Okay. One comment is we have some very small ones in the forks of the river, wildlife management area.
Okay.
They look like trilo.
Oh, yeah. Trilobeta. Yes, Trilobeta. Yes, that's the other one. There's Trilobeta and Leucaena, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah, there's several species around. Yeah, they're cool little plants.
Well, there are a lot of complimentary comments throughout here.
Well, I see Joan. Hi there, Joan. Good to see you. I got some questions from Joan about things to plant. So we were talking about
Hi,
what were we
Milo.
talking about? Hey there.
Yeah, I have to look at those links yet.
Yep.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
You're muted.
I muted myself a little too quickly. I do have a question. When I'm looking at guidebooks, I have the Hemmerly Guide to Flowers of the Central Basin.
Cool.
And when I'm looking up flower plants, sometimes I'll look in the one about Ohio and the Ohio Tennessee Valley Guide. It's over there on the shelf, but anyway, I'll find different names for the same plant and I get confused.
Oh, I know. We all do.
Oh, okay. So it's
We
not
all
just
do.
me.
I figured trying to remember all the plant names is a guard against dementia. I figure as long as my brain can remember all the Latin names and all the common names and what the changes were, and at least remember one name instead of two, then I can keep my brain together. So I think it's a mental exercise. It strengthens the old synapses. Oh, Guide to Central Basin. Well, yeah, the Hemmerly book, I fear that's out of print. I would, and someone else, Kim, you turned me on to a book that another gentleman had written, but that was kind of a limited edition. I suspect that's out of print too. I don't know. I mean, a lot of the best information nowadays is just found on the internet. Although, again, Dennis raises a good question: do we have a reliable checklist? And again, Edwin typed one up based on the Baskin list. But has anybody ever retyped that into a digital document or gotten it? Is there a clean copy that could be, optical character recognized? I don't know. This may be something that we need. I'll let you know if I ever find Edwin's list. I could get it scanned, and somewhere I have Elsie's list. I mean, the Baskins list, but it's an old Xerox of a Xerox probably.
Yeah, and I think that that list was published in the 1986 proceedings from the Southeastern biologist. I mean, I've got.
See, I don't think it was. I think it was an earlier Tennessee Academy of Sciences.
Yeah, but then I think that they must have presented that because I'm pretty sure I have a copy of that. But I'd love to get. I mean, I could probably write a grant through the library to get that digitized, and it would have to be cross-checked, of course, since what Joan was saying with the names of the reclassification and the renaming, it would be a little bit of work.
But we could convert it. I mean, and it would be great to get it arranged into the new families and all of that. I mean, again, I'd have to add it to a list of projects, but that's something we could get people to work on. Let me grab that 86 book a second.
Oh, we've got
Go ahead.
We've got IAMS Nature Center in Knoxville that's been restoring some old quarrying areas that have a ton of limestone chat in it. And they've done a great job of trying to bring back a lot of the species that have been disappearing.
Cool. Yeah, it's like they say, when you want one, you never can find one. I've got 5 copies of that ASB publication somewhere on a bookshelf, but I don't couldn't put my hand on them. But Kim, you still have copies of that, don't you? Yeah. This was a symposium, and again, part of what turned me on, I got lucky. I mean, I was working in the print shop in Murfreesboro at that time, and I really didn't have any money to travel anywhere, but I could just walk down the street, and there was the ASB meeting at Middle Tennessee State University, and they had this day-long symposium on the limestone glades. Edwin Bridges was there, and he presented on the disjunct non-endemic species, and there were all kind of presentations, and I got to meet all these people, and it was just fabulous. And that experience was part of what got me eventually back to school and with more knowledge about how to work in this field. So I was greatly indebted to the people that put that on, and then that publication is still kicking around and probably downloadable. Probably it's a PDF somewhere. So a lot of stuff online, and but again, I think that's something we could work on, would be a revision of that checklist.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful for TNPS website to have at least links to some of these lists for the cedar glade plants and other areas as well throughout the state? Would that be something that folks would find helpful? What do you think, Milo, Kim, anyone else?
Some of it just depends, some of the plants are pretty rare, and I mean, I think it would just depend. And Todd would probably agree with that. I think he's already signed out, but I think that the more people we can get to see and appreciate, the better.
Even if we didn't give locations, but if we gave the location of where to find the lists, so
right,
help people to know what to keep an eye out for.
So another question, someone posted in the chat about how to identify things. Are people aware of iNaturalist? Are people using iNaturalist?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's, if you've got I mean, I encourage you, even if you aren't real confident in your IDs, I encourage you to join that, and account is free. And then you post something and do the best you can with it. Say, well, it's penstemon, or it's a, mustard family, or whatever. Give it, or call it a plant. Put it up there, and people will identify it for you. And if you tag me, put at Milo Pyne, then I will get a message that someone tagged me, and then I can look at it on iNaturalist. Or just, I put my email in the chat, just send me a photo. I don't mind looking at the photo, and I'll do what I can with it. Okay. But some groups are just hard. I mean, people around here struggle with buttercups, and there's a group of buttercups that is very annoying to try to work on. I was said earlier in the meeting, I think I was struggling with penstemon. We couldn't tell, people aren't clear about what's levagetus and what's australis, and it turned out I finally opened up the 1991 Cronquist manual. The Cronquist manual put calicosus as a synonym for levagetus, and that's just not right. So that caused problems for people, because they were keying calicosus as levagetus. Calicosus is the really smooth one with the big, sometimes pinkish corolla. And that's very common in Middle Tennessee. It's not native here, but people have planted it. So they've got that and don't know what to call that. And then if they think that's levagetus, then they think, if they think that's levagetus, then they think that the true levagetus is australis. They've kind of moved everybody down one. So we've got australis in our sandhills, part of the coastal plain. We've got apparently a levagetus around here as the native, and then patches of calicosus where people have planted it or let it escape. So maybe I finally got that figured out.
Joan Palmer commented, don't know the Latin name, some lower growing yellow primrose near Percy Priest Lake at parking areas in Davidson County.
Yeah. Like I say, someone said, what was that one? Triloba. Yeah, Triloba. I think it's Triloba, Trilobeta. Yeah, that's a common one that would be around a parking lot.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, if not, then I'm going to say thank you, Milo. This has been absolutely delightful. For those who aren't that familiar with the Cedar Glades, I'm sure this helped a lot. And for those of us that do love them already, it just makes us love them more.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you.
All right, enjoyed it. Everybody have a good
Thank you.
evening.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.